At my husband's memorial service, my daughter-in-law Vanessa whispered in my ear that I was nothing but dead weight, holding back their family's future. She said it with a smile on her face while shaking hands with the pastor, like she was discussing the weather. What she didn't know was that Robert had been planning for this moment for years, and the envelope tucked inside my purse contained something that would flip her entire world upside down. By the time she realized what my dead weight was really worth, it was already too late. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Clementine Davis, but everyone's always called me Clem. I'm 73 years old, and until 3 weeks ago, I thought I knew exactly where I stood in this world. I was Robert's wife for 47 years, Marcus's mother, and according to my daughter-in-law, a burden that needed to be managed rather than loved. The memorial service for my Robert was held at Riverside Community Church, the same place where Marcus had been baptized 34 years earlier, back when our family still felt like a family. I arrived that morning wearing my navy dress, the one Robert always said brought out my eyes, with my silver hair pinned back the way he liked it. I wasn't trying to make a statement or draw attention to myself. I just wanted to honor my husband's memory and get through the day without falling apart completely. The sanctuary was already half full when I walked through the doors, mostly with Robert's colleagues from the railroad company where he'd worked for 30 years, neighbors from our street, and a few distant relatives I hadn't seen since our wedding. Marcus stood near the front of the church, tall and broad-shouldered just like his father, wearing a black suit that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in 3 months. Next to him was Vanessa, his wife of 8 years, perfectly put together in a designer dress that hugged her slim figure, her blonde hair styled in soft waves that caught the morning light streaming through the stained glass windows. She had her hand on Marcus's arm, playing the role of the supportive wife, but her eyes were scanning the room like she was taking inventory of who was important enough to acknowledge and who could be ignored. I made my way toward them, wanting to stand with my son during this difficult time, wanting to feel like we were facing this loss together as a family. But before I could reach the front pew, Vanessa stepped directly into my path, her expression shifting from public sympathy to private calculation in the span of a heartbeat. "Clem," she said, her voice pitched low enough that the people around us couldn't hear but loud enough to make sure I caught every word. "I think it would be better if you sat toward the back today. This is going to be emotional for Marcus, and he needs space to process without having to worry about taking care of you too." I felt my cheeks flush, not from embarrassment but from the sharp sting of being dismissed by someone who had married into this family while I had built it from the ground up. I glanced over her shoulder at Marcus, hoping he might intervene, might tell his wife that his mother belonged beside him during his father's memorial service. But Marcus was deep in conversation with the funeral director, his back turned to us, completely unaware of what was happening just a few feet away. "I'm not asking to be taken care of," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. "I just want to sit with my family." Vanessa's smile widened, but there was nothing warm about it. It was the kind of smile you'd give to a child who didn't understand why they couldn't have a cookie before dinner. "Oh, Clem, you are family, of course you are. But let's be honest about what's best for everyone here. Robert's gone now, and that changes things. Marcus and I have been talking, and we think it's time to start making some practical decisions about your situation." The word situation hit me like a slap. My situation. As if losing my husband of nearly 5 decades was nothing more than a logistical problem that needed to be solved efficiently. As if 47 years of marriage and 34 years of being Marcus's mother had somehow evaporated the moment Robert's heart stopped beating. "What kind of decisions?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know the answer. Vanessa glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then leaned closer. Her perfume was expensive and overwhelming, the kind of scent that announced its presence before she even entered a room. "Well, for starters, that big house of yours. It's way too much for one person to manage, and honestly, it's just going to become a money pit without Robert there to maintain it. Marcus and I have been looking at some lovely assisted living communities that would be perfect for someone in your position." My mouth went dry. "Assisted living?" "Vanessa, I'm 73, not 93. I can take care of myself just fine. Can you, though? Her tone was gentle, but her words were anything but. When's the last time you drove anywhere farther than the grocery store? When's the last time you handled your own finances, or dealt with insurance companies, or managed household repairs? Robert took care of all of that, didn't he? And now that he's gone, well, it's just going to fall on Marcus and me to handle everything. And to be completely honest with you, Clem, we're already stretched pretty thin with our own responsibilities. I wanted to argue with her, to point out that I had been managing a household and raising a child long before she was even born. That I had worked part-time at the library for 20 years while Robert was building his career. That I wasn't some helpless woman who needed to be warehoused in a facility because it was more convenient for everyone else. But the words stuck in my throat, partly because we were standing in a church during my husband's memorial service, and partly because there was a small, traitorous voice in the back of my mind wondering if maybe she was right. Robert had taken care of the finances. He had handled the insurance and the taxes and the maintenance on the house. He had been the one to make the big decisions while I focused on the day-to-day details of keeping our life running smoothly. And now that he was gone, I felt unmoored, uncertain about how to navigate all the practical aspects of life that he had shielded me from for so many years. We don't have to make any decisions today, Vanessa continued, her voice taking on that same patronizing tone she used when she was explaining something to her 5-year-old daughter. But I wanted you to know that Marcus and I are here to help. We've already started looking into your options, and we think we can make this transition as smooth as possible for everyone involved. She paused, her eyes scanning my face for any sign of resistance. When I didn't immediately respond, she pressed on. The thing is, Clem, Marcus has been under so much stress lately with the promotion at work and the kids' activities and now losing his father. The last thing he needs is to be constantly worried about whether you're okay, whether you're eating enough, whether you're remembering to take your medications. It would be such a relief for him to know that you're somewhere safe, somewhere with professional staff who can make sure you're getting the care you need. I don't need professional care, I said, finally finding my voice. I need my family. Vanessa's expression softened into something that might have been pity if I didn't know her better. Oh, sweetheart, you'll still be family. You'll always be family. But family also means making practical decisions, even when they're hard. And right now, the practical reality is that you've become... She paused, as if searching for the right words, but I could see in her eyes that she knew exactly what she wanted to say. Well, you've become dead weight, Clem. And I know that sounds harsh, but sometimes we have to be honest about these things. Robert's gone, and now it's time for the rest of us to figure out how to move forward without dragging everyone down. Dead weight. The words echoed in my head as I stood there in the middle of my husband's memorial service, surrounded by people who had come to pay their respects to a man who had worked hard his entire life, who had been a devoted husband and father, who had built something meaningful with his hands and his heart. And according to his daughter-in-law, I was nothing more than an inconvenient burden that needed to be efficiently disposed of now that he wasn't around to carry me anymore. I didn't trust myself to speak, so I simply nodded and made my way to a pew near the back of the church, just as Vanessa had suggested. I sat there for the next hour listening to people talk about Robert's integrity, his loyalty, his dedication to his family, and all the while I could feel Vanessa's eyes on me from the front row, probably calculating how quickly she could get me packed up and moved out of the house that Robert and I had called home for over 30 years. The service itself was beautiful, exactly what Robert would have wanted. Pastor Williams spoke about the importance of legacy, about how the love we share with others continues long after we're gone. Marcus gave a brief eulogy about his father's work ethic and dedication, his voice breaking only once when he talked about the camping trips they used to take when he was young. Several of Robert's co-workers shared stories about his reliability and his dry sense of humor. Through it all, I sat in the back like a stranger at my own husband's funeral, invisible and forgotten. After the service, people gathered in the fellowship hall for coffee and sandwiches. I helped myself to a cup of coffee and found a quiet corner where I could watch the interactions without having to participate in them. Vanessa was in her element, moving from group to group, accepting condolences with gracious tears, talking about how difficult this transition was going to be for the family, how much Robert would be missed. She was playing the part of the grieving daughter-in-law perfectly, and I had to admit that she was convincing. Marcus seemed genuinely devastated by his father's death, and my heart ached watching him try to hold himself together while accepting sympathy from people who had known Robert for decades. I wanted to go to him to offer him comfort, to share memories of his father that might help him through this difficult time. But every time I started to move in his direction, Vanessa would appear at his side, her hand on his arm, steering him toward another conversation or another obligation. I was getting ready to leave when someone touched my shoulder. I turned around to see Helen Morrison, Robert's secretary from the railroad office. Helen was about my age, with kind eyes and gray hair that she kept in a practical bob. She had worked with Robert for over 15 years, and I had always liked her quiet competence and genuine warmth. "Clem," she said, her voice soft with sympathy. "I'm so sorry for your loss. Robert was one of the good ones." "Thank you, Helen. That means a lot coming from you. I know he respected you tremendously." Helen glanced around the fellowship hall, then moved closer to me. "I wanted to talk to you before I left. About a week before Robert's heart attack, he asked me to help him with something. He said it was important, that he needed to make sure certain documents were properly organized and filed. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now..." She trailed off, looking uncertain. "What kind of documents?" I asked, though I wasn't sure why it mattered. Robert had always been meticulous about paperwork, always filing everything in its proper place. Helen reached into her purse and pulled out a small envelope, cream-colored with my name written across the front in Robert's familiar handwriting. "He asked me to give this to you after the service, but only if you were alone. He was very specific about that part." I took the envelope with trembling hands, surprised by how heavy it felt for something so small. Robert's handwriting was unmistakable, the careful block letters he had learned in the army and never changed. Just seeing his writing again made my throat tighten with fresh grief. "Did he say what it was about?" I asked. Helen shook her head. "He just said it was something you needed to know, something that couldn't wait but also couldn't be shared while he was still alive." "I'm sorry, Clem. I know that probably doesn't make much sense." It didn't make sense, but then again, nothing about this day had made much sense. I tucked the envelope into my purse, not wanting to open it here in front of everyone. Whatever Robert had wanted to tell me, it felt too private for a church fellowship hall. "Thank you for bringing this to me," I said, "and thank you for being such a good friend to Robert all these years." Helen squeezed my hand. "He talked about you all the time, you know. He was so proud of you, of the life you built together. Don't let anyone make you forget that." She hugged me quickly and then disappeared back into the crowd, leaving me standing there with Robert's envelope burning a hole in my purse. I looked around the room one more time, saw Marcus and Vanessa still holding court near the food table, saw the clusters of people sharing memories and offering support to each other. I didn't belong here anymore, if I ever had. I was dead weight, remember? I slipped out of the fellowship hall without saying goodbye to anyone and walked to my car, a 15-year-old Honda that Robert had maintained with the same care he gave to everything else in our life. The parking lot was nearly full, and I had to walk several blocks to where I had found a space that morning. By the time I reached the car, my feet hurt from the low heels I had worn, and I was grateful to sit down and take a deep breath.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
The envelope sat on the passenger seat next to my purse, and I stared at it for several minutes before finally working up the courage to open it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded in half, with another smaller envelope tucked inside the fold. The paper contained a brief note in Robert's handwriting. "Clem, if you're reading this, then Helen kept her promise and I didn't lose my nerve. I should have told you all of this while I was alive, but I was afraid of how it might change things between us, and I was selfish enough to want to keep what we had for as long as possible. The truth is, I've been preparing for this day for a long time, not because I wanted to leave you, but because I wanted to make sure you would be okay when I did. I know Marcus and Vanessa don't think much of your ability to take care of yourself, and I know they've been making plans for your future that don't include asking what you want. They're wrong about you, Clem. They've always been wrong about you. Inside this envelope is the key to a safety deposit box at First National Bank downtown. Box number 247. Go there as soon as you can, and go alone. Don't tell Marcus or Vanessa about this until you've seen what's inside." Trust me on this. Even if you've never trusted me on anything else, you're stronger than they think you are, and you're about to prove it. I love you, and I'm sorry I waited so long to make sure you knew just how much, Robert." I read the note 3 times, my hands shaking harder with each reading. A safety deposit box? Robert had never mentioned having a safety deposit box. In 47 years of marriage, he had never once suggested that he was keeping secrets from me, that he was preparing for his death in ways that didn't include our usual conversations about wills and insurance and making sure everything was in order. The smaller envelope contained a brass key, old-fashioned and heavy, with the number 247 etched into the metal. I held it in my palm, feeling its weight, trying to process what Robert's note meant. He had been preparing for this day for a long time. He knew that Marcus and Vanessa were making plans for my future. He wanted me to go to the bank alone. I started the car and sat there for a few more minutes, watching people leave the church, getting into their cars and driving away to resume their normal lives. Marcus and Vanessa emerged from the building, Vanessa's arm linked through Marcus's, her head tilted toward him in a gesture of support and intimacy. They walked to their BMW, a car that cost more than Robert and I had ever spent on anything except our house, and drove away without even glancing in my direction. Dead weight. The phrase echoed in my mind as I pulled out of the parking space and headed toward downtown. Maybe Vanessa was right. Maybe I had become nothing more than a burden to be managed, a problem to be solved efficiently, so that everyone else could get on with their lives. But Robert's note suggested something different. He seemed to think I was stronger than they gave me credit for, that I was about to prove something to them, and maybe to myself. First National Bank was a imposing brick building that had been downtown for as long as I could remember. Robert and I had never banked there. We had always used the smaller community bank near our house, the one where the tellers knew our names and asked about Marcus when he was growing up. But apparently Robert had business here that he had never shared with me. I parked in the lot behind the building and walked through the heavy glass doors into the marble lobby. The bank was quieter than I expected for a weekday afternoon, with only a few customers conducting business at the teller windows. I approached the information desk, where a young woman with a professional smile asked how she could help me. "I need to access a safety deposit box," I said, holding up the key. "Box 247. She directed me to a desk near the back of the lobby, where an older man in a well-tailored suit introduced himself as Mr. Patterson, the bank manager. He examined the key and asked for identification, then led me through a heavy door marked "Authorized Personnel Only" into a room lined with rows of metal boxes. "This is one of our larger boxes," Mr. Patterson said as he located 247 and inserted his master key alongside mine. Mr. Davis was very specific about the access arrangements. "Only you are authorized to open this box, and only with proper identification and the original key." The box was indeed large, about the size of a briefcase, and surprisingly heavy when Mr. Patterson slid it out of its slot. He led me to a small private room with a table and chair, placed the box on the table, and left me alone with instructions to ring the bell when I was finished. I sat there staring at the metal box for several minutes, afraid of what I might find inside. Robert had been acting normally in the weeks before his heart attack, at least as far as I could tell. We had been planning a trip to visit his sister in Oregon for her 70th birthday. We had been talking about finally replacing the kitchen cabinets that had been showing their age for years. There had been no indication that he was keeping secrets, that he was worried about something serious enough to warrant a hidden safety deposit box. Finally, I lifted the lid. The box was packed with documents, all neatly organized in labeled folders, just like Robert always kept his important papers at home. But these weren't the kinds of documents I expected to find. The first folder was labeled Investments Private and contained statements from accounts I didn't know existed. Not small accounts either, but substantial sums that made my head spin as I tried to add up the numbers. There were stock certificates for companies I recognized, bonds issued by the federal government, and something called municipal securities that apparently paid regular interest. The most recent statements were dated just 2 weeks before Robert's death, and the total value of all the accounts combined was more than $1.5 million. I stared at the numbers, certain I must be misreading something. Robert and I had lived modestly our entire marriage. We had paid off our house early and saved steadily for retirement, but we had never been wealthy people. Robert worked for the railroad, and I worked part-time at the library. We drove used cars and took modest vacations and shopped for clothes at department stores, not boutiques. Where had all this money come from? The second folder provided some answers. It was labeled Railroad Settlement Confidential and contained legal documents dating back 15 years. Apparently, Robert had been injured in a work-related accident that I barely remembered. Something about his back that had bothered him for a few months, but hadn't seemed serious at the time. According to the documents in the folder, the railroad company had been found liable for the accident due to faulty safety equipment, and they had settled with Robert for a substantial sum in exchange for his agreement not to discuss the settlement publicly. The settlement had been for $800,000, paid out over 10 years to minimize the tax implications. Robert had taken that money and invested it carefully, working with a financial advisor whose business card was clipped to the inside of the folder. Over the course of 15 years, that initial settlement had grown into the portfolio I was looking at now. But why had Robert kept this secret from me? Why had he never mentioned the settlement money or the investments or the fact that we were apparently much wealthier than I had ever imagined? I kept reading through the documents, looking for some explanation, some clue about why my husband of 47 years had hidden such a significant part of our financial life from me. The third folder was labeled Estate Planning Updated and contained a will that was dated just 6 months before Robert's death. I had seen Robert's will before, or at least I thought I had. We had both made wills years ago, simple documents that left everything to each other and then to Marcus if we both died. But this will was different, much more detailed and specific. According to this document, Robert was leaving me the house and all of its contents, as well as the entirety of his investment portfolio. Marcus was to receive a modest inheritance of $50,000, along with some personal items that had belonged to Robert's father. But the bulk of the estate, worth nearly $2 million by my rough calculation, was coming to me. There was also a letter attached to the will, sealed in an envelope with my name on it. I opened it with trembling hands, expecting another brief note like the one Helen had given me at the church. Instead, I found several pages of Robert's careful handwriting, explaining everything he hadn't been able to tell me while he was alive. Dearest Clem, the letter began. If you're reading this, then you've found your way to the safety deposit box, and you've seen the financial documents that I should have shared with you years ago. I know you must be confused and probably hurt that I kept this from you, and I don't expect you to forgive me easily. But I hope you'll understand my reasons once you've read this entire letter. When I was injured at work 15 years ago, I thought it was just another minor accident, the kind of thing that happens when you've been working with heavy machinery for 30 years. But when the doctors started running tests, they discovered that the injury was more serious than it appeared. The railroad company's insurance investigators discovered that the safety equipment had been faulty for months, and that several other workers had been injured in similar accidents that the company had covered up. The settlement they offered was substantial, more money than we had ever dreamed of having. But it came with conditions. I couldn't discuss the settlement with anyone, including you, and I couldn't use the money in any way that might draw attention to its source. The railroad company was trying to keep the whole situation quiet, and they made it clear that violating the confidentiality agreement would result in them demanding the full settlement back, plus legal fees. At first, I thought I would just invest the money quietly, and then surprise you with it when I retired. I imagined telling you that we could travel anywhere you wanted, that we could upgrade the house or help Marcus and Vanessa with their mortgage, or maybe buy a little vacation cabin somewhere. But as the years went by and the investments grew, I realized that having this secret was changing me in ways I didn't like. I started to see our family differently, started to notice things that maybe I had been blind to before. I saw how Vanessa treated you, how she made subtle comments about your intelligence and your abilities. I saw how Marcus went along with her attitudes, how he seemed to have forgotten that you were the one who raised him, who supported him through every difficulty, who made sacrifices so that he could have opportunities we never had. I watched them make assumptions about our financial situation, watched them plan your future based on the belief that you would be a burden to them after I was gone. And I realized that if I told you about the money, if we suddenly started living differently, they would know something had changed. They would start asking questions, maybe even demanding explanations. And I was afraid that they would find ways to take advantage of the situation, to manipulate you into sharing the money in ways that wouldn't serve your best interests. So I decided to wait. I decided to let them continue thinking we were just a middle-class couple with modest savings, and I made plans to ensure that you would be financially secure after I was gone. I worked with a lawyer and a financial advisor to structure everything in a way that would give you complete control over the money, with no legal obligation to share it with anyone if you chose not to. I know this puts you in a difficult position, Clem. I know that Marcus and Vanessa are already making plans for your future. Plans that assume you'll be financially dependent on them. They've probably already started talking about selling the house, about moving you into some kind of assisted living situation where they can manage every aspect of your life. They think you're helpless without me, that you can't handle your own affairs or make your own decisions. They're wrong about you, just like they've been wrong about so many things. You're one of the strongest people I've ever known, and you're about to have the resources to prove it. You don't have to accept their plans for your life. You don't have to let them treat you like a burden or an inconvenience. You have choices now, choices that they don't know about and can't control. What you do with this information is entirely up to you. You could share it with Marcus and Vanessa, try to repair the relationships, and bring the family back together. You could keep it private and simply use the financial security to live your life on your own terms. You could use some of the money to help Marcus and his family while keeping the rest for yourself. The choice is yours, and no one else has the right to make it for you. But before you decide anything, I want you to pay attention to how they treat you over the next few weeks. I want you to listen to what they say about your capabilities, your future, your value as a person, now that I'm no longer here to take care of you. I want you to see them clearly, maybe for the first time, and then make your decisions based on what you observe. You deserve to be treated with respect and dignity, Clem. You deserve to have your wishes considered and your autonomy respected. If Marcus and Vanessa can't see that, if they continue to treat you like dead weight that needs to be efficiently managed, then maybe it's time for them to learn that they've been wrong about more than just your capabilities. I love you more than I ever found ways to express while I was alive. I'm sorry I waited so long to make sure you had the tools you need to protect yourself and live the life you choose. You're going to be fine, better than fine. You're going to be free. Oh, my love, Robert. I sat in that small room for nearly an hour, reading Robert's letter over and over, trying to process everything he had revealed. The money was real, substantial enough to change my life completely. But more importantly, Robert had seen what I was only beginning to understand about my relationship with Marcus and Vanessa. He had recognized their attitudes and their assumptions, and he had made sure I would have the resources to respond to them on my own terms. Dead weight. Vanessa had called me dead weight just a few hours ago, standing in the church where we had just memorialized my husband. She had made it clear that she saw me as a burden, a problem to be solved, an inconvenience that needed to be managed efficiently, now that Robert was no longer around to handle it. But Robert had left me something that Vanessa didn't know about, something that gave me power and choices that she couldn't imagine. I wasn't helpless. I wasn't dependent on Marcus and Vanessa's charity. I wasn't dead weight. I was a woman with nearly $2 million and a decision to make about how I wanted to spend the rest of my life. And for the first time since Robert's funeral, I found myself smiling. I carefully placed all the documents back in the safety deposit box, locked it securely, and rang the bell for Mr. Patterson. As I walked back through the bank lobby and out to my car, I felt different than I had that morning. Steadier. Stronger. Like I was waking up from a long dream, where I had forgotten who I was and what I was capable of. Vanessa thought I was dead weight. Marcus thought I needed to be managed and controlled and moved into assisted living for my own good. They had plans for my future that didn't include asking what I wanted or respecting my autonomy as an adult woman who had been taking care of herself and others for 7 decades. They were about to discover just how wrong they were about me, and I was looking forward to their education. The drive home from the bank took me through the neighborhood where Robert and I had built our life together. past the library where I had worked for 20 years, past the school where Marcus had played Little League baseball, past all the familiar landmarks of a life well lived. But everything looked different now. Sharper somehow, like I was seeing it all with new eyes. Our house sat on a quiet street, lined with mature oak trees. A modest two-story colonial with blue shutters and a front porch, where Robert used to sit in the evenings, reading the newspaper and waving to neighbors who walked by. It wasn't a grand house, but it was ours, paid for with decades of careful saving and responsible choices. Now I knew that it was entirely mine, along with resources I had never dreamed of having. I pulled into the driveway and sat in the car for a few minutes, looking at the house with fresh appreciation. Marcus and Vanessa thought it was too much for me to handle, that I would be overwhelmed by the maintenance and upkeep without Robert there to manage everything. They saw it as a burden that needed to be eliminated, sold off so that the proceeds could be used to pay for my care in some institutional setting. But I saw something different now. I saw a home that I could modify and update exactly the way I wanted, with money that would allow me to hire whatever help I needed without asking anyone's permission. I saw a base of operations for whatever came next in my life, a place where I could make my own decisions and live according to my own priorities. The phone was ringing when I walked through the front door, and I knew without looking at the caller ID that it would be either Marcus or Vanessa, probably calling to check on how I was handling the aftermath of the memorial service. I let it go to voicemail and listened to the message while I made myself a cup of tea. It was Vanessa, her voice carefully modulated to sound concerned and caring. "Hi Clem, it's me. I just wanted to check in and see how you're doing after this afternoon. I know it was a difficult day, and I hope you understand that everything I said came from a place of love and concern for your well-being. Marcus and I have been talking, and we'd like to take you to dinner tomorrow night so we can discuss some of the options we've been researching for you. There are some really wonderful communities that specialize in helping people transition into this new phase of life, and I think you'll be excited to see what's available. Call me back when you get this, okay? We love you." I deleted the message without returning the call. Tomorrow night, they wanted to take me to dinner and present me with their plans for my future, their carefully researched options for managing the burden I had become. They probably had brochures and price lists, and maybe even applications already filled out in my name. But they didn't know about the safety deposit box or the investment portfolio or the will that left me everything Robert had built during our life together. They didn't know that their assumptions about my financial dependence were completely wrong. They thought they were dealing with a helpless widow who would gratefully accept whatever arrangements they made for her. They were about to learn otherwise, and I was going to enjoy every minute of their education. The next morning arrived gray and drizzling, the kind of October weather that made everything feel muted and somber. I had barely slept, my mind cycling through everything I had discovered in that safety deposit box, trying to reconcile the Robert the first thought I knew with the man who had secretly accumulated nearly $2 million and hidden it from me for 15 years. Part of me felt betrayed by his secrecy, but a larger part was beginning to understand his reasoning as I replayed Vanessa's words from the memorial service. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my second cup of coffee when I heard a car door slam in my driveway. Through the window, I could see Marcus walking up the front path, his shoulders hunched against the rain. He was alone, which surprised me. In the 8 years since his marriage to Vanessa, he rarely came to visit without her, and when he did, it was usually for some specific purpose, rather than a casual drop-in. I opened the door before he could knock, and he looked up with a startled expression, as if he hadn't expected me to be watching for him. "Hi, Mom," he said, his voice carrying the same careful tone I had been hearing from him more and more often in recent years. "I hope it's not too early. I wanted to talk to you about yesterday." "Come in," I said, stepping back to let him pass. "You're soaked. Let me get you a towel." Marcus shook his head, drops of rain scattering from his dark hair. "I'm fine. This won't take long." He followed me into the living room but remained standing, his hands shoved deep in the pockets of his jacket. I wanted to apologize for yesterday, for not being more attentive during the service. "I know it must have been hard for you, sitting by yourself." I studied his face, looking for some sign of genuine concern or affection, but what I saw instead was discomfort. The expression of a man who was fulfilling an obligation, rather than reaching out to his grieving mother. "It was hard," I agreed, "but I understood that you had other responsibilities." The thing is, Mom, Vanessa and I have been talking, and we're worried about you. This house is so big, and with Dad gone, it's going to be a lot for you to manage on your own. We've been doing some research, and there are some really nice places that might be perfect for someone in your situation. There was that word again, situation. As if losing my husband was nothing more than a logistical challenge that needed to be efficiently resolved. I sat down in Robert's recliner, the chair where he had spent countless evenings reading and watching television, and gestured for Marcus to take a seat on the couch. He perched on the edge of the cushions, as if he was ready to leave at any moment. What kind of places? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small stack of colorful brochures, the kind of glossy marketing materials that made everything look appealing and worry-free. There's Sunset Manor, which is only about 20 minutes from our house, so we could visit regularly, and Meadowbrook Gardens, which has really comprehensive care services, and Golden Years Community, which has all kinds of activities and social opportunities. He spread the brochures out on the coffee table between us, their cheerful photographs showing smiling elderly people engaged in various group activities, sunrise yoga on manicured lawns, arts and crafts circles in bright, cheerful rooms, dining halls full of silver-haired residents enjoying what looked like gourmet meals. It all looked very pleasant and very institutional. These all look like assisted living facilities, I said, picking up one of the brochures and scanning the fine print on the back. Marcus, I'm 73 years old, not 93. I don't need assistance with daily living activities. Marcus shifted uncomfortably on the couch. Mom, be realistic. When's the last time you drove anywhere except the grocery store? When's the last time you handled your own banking or dealt with insurance companies? Dad took care of all of that stuff, and now that he's gone, it's all going to fall on you, or on us if you can't manage it. The irony of his words wasn't lost on me. Less than 24 hours earlier, I had navigated downtown traffic, located an unfamiliar bank, accessed a safety deposit box, and discovered that I was worth nearly $2 million. I had read and understood complex financial documents, comprehended investment strategies, and processed legal paperwork that would have challenged many people half my age. But in Marcus's mind, I was incapable of handling my own affairs, simply because Robert had chosen to manage our finances during our marriage. I might be more capable than you think, I said carefully, testing the waters. Marcus gave me the same patronizing smile I had seen on Vanessa's face the day before. Mom, I know you think you can handle everything, but this isn't the 1950s anymore. Banking is all done online now. Insurance companies want you to navigate phone trees and websites. Even paying bills requires dealing with automated systems and customer service representatives who barely speak English. It's frustrating for people our age, and it's only going to get worse as you get older. Our age. Marcus was 34 years old, barely out of graduate school when I was already approaching retirement. But somehow he had decided that we were both too old to function in the modern world, that the technological complexities of contemporary life were beyond our capacity to learn or adapt to. What if I don't want to move into assisted living? I asked. What if I want to stay in my own home? Marcus's expression tightened slightly, and for a moment I caught a glimpse of the impatience he was trying to hide beneath his veneer of filial concern. Mom, that's not really practical. This house is way too big for one person. The heating bills alone are going to eat up most of your Social Security check. And that's assuming nothing major breaks down. When was the last time the roof was inspected? When was the last time the furnace was serviced? What happens when the water heater goes out or the electrical system needs updating? He was rattling off potential problems like a salesman trying to create urgency around a purchase decision. Every word was calculated to make me feel overwhelmed, incompetent, frightened of the responsibilities that came with homeownership. It was a masterful performance. And I realized that he and Vanessa had probably rehearsed this conversation, anticipating my objections and preparing responses designed to wear down my resistance. Those are all manageable problems, I said. People hire contractors and service companies to handle maintenance issues. It's not rocket science. With what money? Marcus asked, and there was a sharp edge to his voice now, as if he was losing patience with my refusal to accept the obvious solution he was offering. Mom, let's be honest about the financial reality here. Dad worked for the railroad for 30 years, but he wasn't exactly pulling down a six-figure salary. You worked part-time at the library. You've got Social Security and maybe a small pension, but that's not going to be enough to maintain this house and pay for your living expenses and cover medical costs as you get older. I could feel anger building in my chest, a slow burn that was fueled not just by Marcus's assumptions about my financial situation, but by his complete dismissal of my intelligence and competence. He was talking to me like I was a child who couldn't be trusted to understand basic arithmetic, like I had spent the last 7 decades of my life in some kind of protected bubble, where I had never had to make decisions or solve problems or navigate the complexities of adult life. Maybe I have more resources than you realize, I said, letting a hint of steel creep into my voice. Marcus laughed, not unkindly, but with the indulgent amusement of an adult humoring a child's fantasy. Mom, I love your optimism, but we need to deal with reality here. Vanessa and I have been looking at your situation from every angle, and the math just doesn't work. Even if you sold this house, the proceeds wouldn't be enough to cover the cost of hiring full-time help or making the modifications you'd need to age in place safely. You've been looking at my situation? I repeated. What exactly does that mean? Marcus had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. We've been trying to get a handle on what your financial picture is going to look like going forward. Dad's pension will stop now that he's gone, and Social Security survivor benefits are less than what you were getting as a couple. We've been running some preliminary numbers, based on what we know about your assets and expenses. And what do you know about my assets? Well, there's the house, obviously, and Dad's life insurance policy, though that's not going to be a huge amount. Maybe his 401k from the railroad, if there's anything left in it. Your savings account at Community Bank, though I'm assuming that's pretty modest. Is there anything else we should know about? The question hung in the air between us, and I realized that this was a test. Marcus and Vanessa had made assumptions about my financial situation based on their observations of how Robert and I had lived. They had seen our modest lifestyle, our practical choices, our reluctance to spend money on luxury items or expensive vacations. They had concluded that we were a typical middle-class couple with typical middle-class savings, and they were waiting for me to confirm their assessment. The smart thing to do would have been to play along, to let them continue believing that I was financially dependent on their generosity and goodwill. Robert's letter had suggested that I should observe how they treated me before deciding what to do with the information I had discovered. This was exactly the kind of moment he had been talking about. I think you'd be surprised, I said neutrally. Marcus leaned forward, his interest clearly piqued. What do you mean? I mean that your father was better with money than you might think. And I'm better at understanding our financial situation than you're giving me credit for. Mom, I'm not trying to insult your intelligence. I'm just trying to help you face reality. If there was some secret nest egg that Dad had been hiding away, don't you think he would have mentioned it? Don't you think he would have made sure you knew about it? The irony was almost overwhelming. Robert had mentioned it, in the most elaborate and carefully planned way possible. He had made sure I knew about it, but only after his death, and only in a way that would give me complete control over when and how to reveal the information to others. Marcus was sitting 3 feet away from a woman who could buy and sell his BMW without thinking twice about it, and he was lecturing her about facing financial reality. Maybe he did, I said quietly. Something in my tone must have alerted Marcus to the possibility that this conversation wasn't going the way he had expected. His casual confidence wavered slightly, and he studied my face with the focused attention he hadn't shown since walking through my front door. What are you saying, Mom? Did Dad leave some kind of instructions or documents that we don't know about? I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the rain that was still falling steadily on the street where Robert and I had lived for 30 years. Marcus was asking direct questions now, dropping the pretense of casual concern and moving into interrogation mode. This was the moment when I could either reveal what I knew or continue playing the role of the helpless widow he expected me to be. Your father left me everything I need to take care of myself, I said without turning around, including the knowledge of how you and Vanessa really feel about me. What's that supposed to mean? I turned to face him, and for the first time in our conversation, I let him see the anger that had been building since Vanessa called me dead weight at his father's memorial service. It means that I heard what you said to me yesterday. It means that I understand exactly what kind of problem you think I've become now that your father isn't here to manage me. Marcus's face flushed red. Mom, if Vanessa said something that upset you, I'm sure she didn't mean it the way it sounded. She's been under a lot of stress with the kids and her job, and losing Dad has been hard on all of us. She called me dead weight, I said flatly. She said it was time to make practical decisions about my situation. She talked about me like I was a burden that needed to be efficiently disposed of, now that your father wasn't around to carry me anymore. She didn't mean it like that, Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. She's just worried about your safety and well-being. We both are. No, Marcus, you're worried about your convenience and your finances. You're worried about having to take care of a needy mother-in-law who might interfere with your lifestyle or your plans. You're worried that I might become a drain on your resources or an embarrassment to your social status. Marcus stood abruptly, his face now showing the irritation he had been trying to conceal. That's not fair, Mom. We're trying to help you. We're trying to make sure you're taken care of and safe and not living alone in a house that's too big for you to manage. If you want to interpret that as some kind of selfish conspiracy, that's your choice, but it's not accurate. Then why didn't you ask me what I wanted? I shot back. Why didn't you sit down with me and have a conversation about my preferences and my concerns before you started researching assisted living facilities and making plans for my future? Why did Vanessa feel comfortable telling me that I was dead weight before either of you bothered to find out whether I actually needed your help? Marcus opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. For a moment, he looked like the little boy who had been caught breaking something valuable and was trying to decide whether to confess or blame someone else. Finally, he said, "We were trying to be proactive. We didn't want you to have to worry about all the details while you're still grieving. Or maybe you didn't want to risk having me say no to your plans." Mom, that's not. It's exactly what happened, Marcus. You and Vanessa decided what was best for me without consulting me, and then you came here to present your decision as if it was the only reasonable option. You brought brochures for facilities you'd already researched. You prepared talking points about my supposed incompetence and financial limitations. This wasn't a discussion. It was a sales presentation. Marcus stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him reassessing everything he thought he knew about this conversation and about me. The helpless, overwhelmed widow he had expected to find was nowhere in evidence. Instead, he was facing a woman who was clearly thinking for herself and wasn't impressed with his carefully rehearsed arguments. "What do you want from me?" he asked finally. "I want you to treat me like a competent adult who is capable of making her own decisions about her own life. I want you to ask me what I want, instead of telling me what you think I need. And I want you to go home and have a very serious conversation with your wife about the way she speaks to and about your mother." Marcus gathered up the brochures from the coffee table and stuffed them back into his jacket pocket. "Fine. But Mom, if you change your mind, if you decide that you need help managing everything on your own, you need to call us. Don't wait until there's a crisis." "I'll keep that in mind," I said dryly. After Marcus left, I stood at the window and watched his car disappear down the street. The conversation had gone exactly as Robert had predicted it would. Marcus and Vanessa had made assumptions about my capabilities and my financial situation, and they had developed plans for my future based on those assumptions. When I had shown signs of independence or resistance, Marcus had become frustrated and slightly aggressive, dropping his mask of filial concern to reveal the impatience underneath. But I had also learned something important about myself in that conversation. I wasn't the helpless widow that Marcus and Vanessa expected me to be. I was angry, which was something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. I was clear-headed about their motivations and their tactics, and I was perfectly capable of standing up for myself when necessary. The phone rang as I was making lunch, and this time I answered it without checking the caller ID. It was Vanessa, her voice bright with the kind of artificial cheerfulness that made my teeth ache. "Hi, Clem. Marcus told me he stopped by this morning to chat with you about some of the options we've been researching. I hope you found the information helpful." "I found it illuminating," I said carefully. "Wonderful. I was hoping we could get together this afternoon to continue the conversation. There are a few more places I'd love to show you, and I thought we could grab some lunch and make a day of it. Just us girls. Just us girls." As if we were sorority sisters planning a shopping trip, instead of a 73-year-old woman and her 32-year-old daughter-in-law discussing the former's involuntary relocation to institutional care. That's very thoughtful of you, Vanessa, but I have other plans this afternoon. Oh. There was a pause, and I could hear the sound of Vanessa recalibrating her approach. Well, what about tomorrow? Or this weekend? I know this is a big decision, and I want to make sure you have all the information you need to make the right choice. The right choice. Not the choice I wanted to make, but the choice that Vanessa and Marcus had already determined was correct. I was beginning to understand that their entire approach was based on the assumption that there was only one reasonable option, and their job was simply to help me accept that reality. Vanessa, can I ask you something? Of course. Yesterday at the memorial service, you mentioned that Marcus had been under stress because of his concern about taking care of me after Robert's death. You said that he was worried about whether I was eating enough, taking my medications, that sort of thing. But Marcus has never asked me about my eating habits or my medications. In fact, yesterday was the first time he's been to this house in over 3 months. So I'm curious about where his concern is actually coming from. Another pause, longer this time. When Vanessa spoke again, her voice had lost some of its artificial brightness. Well, I think it's natural for him to be worried, even if he hasn't expressed it directly. Losing a parent is traumatic, and now that Robert's gone, Marcus feels responsible for making sure you're okay. Responsible in what way? In every way, Clem. Financially, emotionally, practically. You're his mother, and now that you're on your own, he feels like it's his job to make sure nothing bad happens to you. And what kind of bad things is he worried about? You know, the usual things. Accidents, health emergencies, financial problems, social isolation. The kinds of things that happen to elderly people who are living alone without adequate support systems. Elderly people. I was 73, not 93. But in Vanessa's mind, I had apparently crossed some invisible threshold that transformed me from a capable adult into an elderly person who required supervision and management. It was fascinating and infuriating at the same time. What if I told you that I don't need Marcus to be responsible for me in any of those ways? I asked. What if I told you that I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself financially, emotionally, and practically? Oh, Clem. Vanessa's voice shifted into the patronizing tone I was becoming all too familiar with. I know you want to believe that, and I admire your independence, I really do. But we have to be realistic about what's possible at your age and in your circumstances. You've been married for almost 50 years, and Robert handled all the complicated stuff. It's not your fault that you don't have experience with modern banking and technology and all the other things you'll need to manage on your own. That's why these communities are so wonderful. They have professional staff who can handle all of that for you, so you can focus on enjoying your retirement. Enjoying my retirement. As if being warehoused in an institutional setting with professional staff managing every aspect of my life was some kind of reward for surviving to the age of 73. As if giving up my autonomy and independence was a privilege I should be grateful for rather than a loss I should resist. What if I'm not interested in that kind of arrangement? I asked. Well, then we'd have to talk about other options, Vanessa said, and for the first time in our conversation, I heard a hint of steel in her voice. But Clem, you have to understand that Marcus and I can't just stand by and watch you struggle on your own. If you're determined to stay in that big house by yourself, then we'd need to make sure you have adequate support in place. Home health aides, meal delivery services, transportation assistance, that sort of thing. And that gets expensive very quickly. Expensive for whom? Well, for everyone involved. These services aren't covered by Medicare, and I'm assuming your budget is going to be pretty tight on just Social Security and whatever small savings Robert left behind. So if you want to stay in your own home, Marcus and I would probably end up covering a lot of those costs. Plus, spending our weekends driving over there to check on you and handle whatever emergencies come up. And there it was. The real issue wasn't my safety or my well-being or my happiness. The real issue was money and convenience. Marcus and Vanessa were worried that I would become a financial drain on their resources and a logistical burden on their time. They wanted me safely tucked away in an institutional setting where trained professionals could deal with any problems that arose. where they could visit occasionally and feel good about themselves for fulfilling their family obligations without actually having to sacrifice anything meaningful. I see, I said quietly. I hope you don't take that the wrong way, Vanessa said quickly. We love you and we want to help. But we also have to think about what's realistic for our family. Marcus has been working so hard to get this promotion at work, and the kids have so many activities, and we're already stretched pretty thin financially with the mortgage and the car payments and everything else. We just want to find a solution that works for everyone. A solution that works for everyone, meaning a solution that works for Marcus and Vanessa while requiring me to give up everything that mattered to me. A solution that allowed them to feel virtuous about caring for Marcus's mother while actually minimizing their involvement in my life. A solution that transformed me from a person with preferences and autonomy into a problem that had been efficiently solved. I'll think about what you've said, I told her. Oh, good. I'm so glad we could have this conversation. I know it's a lot to process, but I really think you're going to love some of these places once you see them. Should we plan on tomorrow afternoon? I could pick you up around 1, and we could visit Sunset Manor and maybe grab dinner afterward. I'll call you, I said, and hung up before she could respond. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after that phone call, thinking about everything Vanessa had revealed during our conversation. She saw me as a burden that needed to be managed efficiently. She assumed I was financially dependent on Marcus's charity. She believed I was incompetent to handle the basic responsibilities of adult life, and she was making plans for my future based on what was convenient for her rather than what I actually wanted. But what she didn't know, what neither she nor Marcus suspected, was that I had resources they couldn't imagine. I had nearly $2 million in investments and a will that left me everything Robert had accumulated during our 47 years of marriage. I had the financial freedom to live exactly the way I chose to live, with or without their approval or support. The question was what to do with that knowledge. Robert's letter had suggested that I should observe how they treated me before deciding how much to reveal about my actual situation. So far, their behavior had been exactly what he had predicted it would be. They saw me as dead weight, a problem to be solved rather than a person to be respected. Maybe it was time for them to learn just how wrong they were about me. Maybe it was time for them to discover that the helpless widow they were trying to manipulate had more power than they could possibly imagine. And maybe it was time for me to start using that power to protect myself and live the life I actually wanted to live. I pulled out a legal pad and started making a list of everything I needed to do. Contact Robert's financial advisor to discuss my investment options. Meet with a lawyer to review the will and understand my legal situation. Research home security systems and maintenance services so I could stay in my own house safely and comfortably. Start thinking about what I wanted the rest of my life to look like, independent of Marcus and Vanessa's plans for me. For the first time since Robert's death, I felt energized rather than overwhelmed. I had work to do, decisions to make, and a future to plan. And I was going to do it all on my own terms, whether Marcus and Vanessa liked it or not. The next morning brought sunshine and crisp autumn air, the kind of day that made everything seem possible. I dressed carefully in a navy suit that I hadn't worn in years, put on my good pearl earrings, and drove downtown to meet with James Morrison, the financial advisor whose business card I had found in Robert's safety deposit box. Mr. Morrison's office was on the 3rd floor of a modern glass building that I would never have imagined entering under normal circumstances. The waiting room was elegantly appointed with leather furniture and expensive-looking artwork, the kind of place where wealthy people came to discuss their wealthy people problems. I felt slightly intimidated as I announced myself to the receptionist, a polished young woman who looked like she belonged in a fashion magazine. But when James Morrison emerged from his office to greet me, he was nothing like what I had expected. He was probably in his 50s, with gray hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, wearing a rumpled shirt that suggested he was more interested in substance than style. He shook my hand warmly and led me into his office, which was cluttered with financial reports and family photographs rather than the intimidating displays of wealth I had feared. Mrs. Davis, he said as we settled into chairs around a small conference table. First, let me offer my condolences on Robert's passing. He was a remarkable man, and I was privileged to work with him for the past 15 years. Thank you, I said. Mr. Morrison, I have to admit that I'm completely surprised by everything I found in that safety deposit box. Robert never mentioned having investments or working with a financial advisor. I had no idea we had that kind of money. Mr. Morrison nodded thoughtfully. Robert was very specific about wanting to keep his financial affairs private, even from you. At first, I thought it was unusual, but as we worked together over the years, I came to understand his reasoning. He was protecting you, in his own way. Protecting me from what? From the knowledge that you were wealthy, and from all the complications that come with that knowledge. Robert was afraid that if you knew about the money, it would change how you lived, how you related to other people, how you saw yourself. He wanted you to continue being the person you had always been, at least until he was no longer around to help you navigate the challenges that come with significant wealth. I thought about Marcus and Vanessa's assumptions about my financial situation, about their carefully rehearsed arguments for why I needed to be managed and controlled. He was right to be concerned, I said. My son and daughter-in-law are making plans for my future based on the belief that I'm financially dependent on them. If they knew about this money, they would have very different opinions about what was best for you, Mr. Morrison finished. Robert worried about that. He worried that family members might try to influence your decisions in ways that served their interests rather than yours. So what happens now? What are my options? Mr. Morrison pulled out a thick folder and spread several documents across the table. You have quite a few options, actually. The investment portfolio Robert built is very well diversified and conservatively managed. It's generating substantial income through dividends and interest, probably more than you'll need for normal living expenses. You could maintain the current investment strategy and live very comfortably on the income alone, or you could make changes based on your own priorities and preferences. He walked me through the various components of the portfolio, explaining how Robert had allocated funds across different types of investments to minimize risk while maximizing long-term growth. It was sophisticated financial planning, the kind of strategy that wealthy families use to preserve and build generational wealth. Robert had created something that could support me for the rest of my life and still leave a substantial inheritance for Marcus if I chose to pass it on. The annual income from these investments should be around $120,000, Mr. Morrison said. That's after taxes and management fees. It's enough to maintain your current lifestyle very comfortably, with plenty left over for travel, home improvements, charitable giving, or whatever else you might want to do. $120,000 a year. More than twice what Robert and I had ever earned combined during our working years. More than enough to hire whatever help I needed to stay in my own home. More than enough to live independently without asking anyone for anything. And if I wanted to help my son financially, if I wanted to contribute to his children's education or help with their mortgage, that would certainly be possible, Mr. Morrison said. But Robert was very clear that any such gifts should be entirely your choice, made on your own terms and timeline. He didn't want you to feel pressured or obligated to share the money simply because family members expected it. We spent another hour discussing practical matters, how to access the investment accounts, how to manage tax obligations, how to make decisions about future investments. Mr. Morrison gave me a thick packet of materials to review at home and scheduled a follow-up meeting for the following week. As I was preparing to leave, he said something that stopped me in my tracks. Mrs. Davis, Robert asked me to give you a message if anything ever happened to him. He said to tell you that you were stronger than anyone gave you credit for, including yourself. He said you had spent so many years taking care of other people that you had forgotten how capable you were of taking care of yourself. He wanted you to remember that, and to use this money to prove it. I drove home with those words echoing in my mind. Robert had seen something in me that I had lost sight of over the years, some essential strength that had been buried under decades of putting other people's needs before my own. He had given me the resources to rediscover that strength, to become the person I had been before marriage and motherhood had taught me to make myself smaller and more accommodating. When I arrived home, there were 3 messages on my answering machine, all from Vanessa. The first was cheerful and persistent, reminding me about our planned afternoon of touring assisted living facilities. The second was slightly less cheerful, expressing concern that I hadn't returned her call and asking if I was feeling all right. The third was distinctly cooler, informing me that she had taken the liberty of making appointments at 2 facilities for that afternoon, and that she would be picking me up at 1 o'clock whether I called back or not. I deleted all 3 messages without returning her calls. Then I sat down at Robert's desk and started making plans of my own. At exactly 1 o'clock, I heard a car horn honking in my driveway with the kind of aggressive persistence that suggested the driver had no intention of waiting patiently. I looked out the window to see Vanessa sitting behind the wheel of her silver BMW, checking her watch and tapping her fingers on the steering wheel with obvious irritation. She honked again, longer this time, as if the problem was that I simply hadn't heard her the first time. I stayed exactly where I was, sitting at Robert's desk with a cup of tea and the financial documents James Morrison had given me spread out in front of me. The investment statements made for fascinating reading, especially the quarterly reports that showed how carefully Robert had been building our wealth over the past 15 years. Every dividend reinvested, every stock split managed with precision, every market downturn weathered with the patience of a man who understood that true wealth was built over decades, not months. The horn honked a third time, and I could see Vanessa looking toward the house with an expression of mounting frustration. She climbed out of the car and marched up the front walk with the determined stride of someone who is accustomed to getting her way through sheer force of will. When she reached the front door, she didn't knock politely. She pounded on it like a police officer serving a warrant. "Clem, I know you're in there. We have appointments to keep." I remained seated at the desk, sipping my tea and studying a particularly interesting report about municipal bond performance. Vanessa's voice carried clearly through the house as she continued her assault on my front door. "Clem, this is ridiculous. I've made appointments at 2 facilities, and they're expecting us. You can't just ignore me when we've made plans." Plans? As if she had consulted me about these appointments rather than unilaterally scheduling them and then informing me that I was expected to comply. As if my time and preferences were irrelevant considerations in the process of organizing my own future. The pounding continued for several more minutes, followed by the sound of footsteps moving around to the back of the house. I heard Vanessa trying the back door, then the sound of her heels clicking on the wooden deck as she peered through windows, presumably trying to confirm that I was actually inside, rather than legitimately absent. When she returned to the front door, her voice had taken on a different quality, somewhere between concern and accusation. "Clem, if you don't answer this door right now, I'm calling Marcus, and if he can't reach you, we're calling the police for a welfare check. Is that what you want? Do you want the neighbors to see police cars in your driveway because you're too stubborn to answer your door?" The threat was both revealing and ineffective. Revealing because it showed how quickly Vanessa was willing to escalate from polite requests to authoritarian demands when she encountered resistance. Ineffective because I was perfectly free to ignore visitors in my own home, and no police officer in the world was going to break down my door because I had chosen not to go touring assisted living facilities with my daughter-in-law. But the threat also gave me an idea. I stood up from the desk, walked to the front door, and opened it with a smile that I hoped conveyed pleasant surprise rather than the cold anger I was actually feeling. "Vanessa! I'm so sorry, I was on an important phone call and couldn't get to the door. You should have called to let me know you were coming." Vanessa's face cycled through several expressions in rapid succession: relief, irritation, suspicion, and finally a forced return to her usual artificial brightness. "I did call," she said through gritted teeth. "I left 3 messages yesterday telling you I would be here at 1 o'clock to take you to visit Sunset Manor and Meadowbrook Gardens." "Oh my," I said, widening my eyes in what I hoped looked like innocent confusion. I must have missed those messages. I've been so scattered since Robert's death. You know how it is. It was a calculated performance, designed to give Vanessa exactly what she expected to see. A scattered, overwhelmed widow who couldn't even manage to check her answering machine properly. I could see her visibly relax as I confirmed her assumptions about my incompetence. "Well, you're here now, and that's what matters," she said, stepping past me into the house without being invited. "Let me just grab my purse and we can get going. The appointments are scheduled 15 minutes apart, so we'll need to stay on schedule. Actually, Vanessa, I'm afraid I can't go with you today after all." She turned to face me, her expression shifting back toward irritation. "What do you mean you can't go? Clem, I've spent hours researching these places and scheduling these appointments. The staff at both facilities have cleared time in their schedules specifically to meet with us. I understand, and I appreciate all the work you've done. But I've decided that I'm not interested in moving into assisted living right now. I want to stay in my own home. Vanessa stared at me for a moment, as if she couldn't quite process what I had said. Clem, we've been through this. Staying in this house by yourself isn't realistic. You need to at least look at your options before you make a decision. I've already made my decision, I said gently. This is my home, and I'm not ready to leave it. But you haven't seen what's available. These places aren't like the nursing homes you're probably thinking of. They're luxury communities with amazing amenities and social opportunities. Sunset Manor has a full-service spa and gourmet dining. Meadowbrook Gardens has golf courses and art studios. You'd have a much richer social life than you can have living alone in this big empty house. She was using the same sales tactics that Marcus had employed the day before, trying to reframe institutional living as an upgrade rather than a loss of independence. The amenities she was describing sounded lovely, but they couldn't compensate for the fundamental reality that I would be giving up my autonomy in exchange for supervised comfort. I'm sure they're very nice places, I said, but I prefer to stay here. Vanessa's mask of patience was beginning to slip, and I could see flashes of the frustration she was trying to conceal. Clem, you're not thinking clearly about this. You're grieving, and you're not in the right emotional state to make major life decisions. That's why Marcus and I are trying to help you. We can see the situation more objectively than you can right now. The situation. There was that word again, the clinical term they used to describe my life as if it were a problem to be solved, rather than a human experience to be respected. And now Vanessa was suggesting that grief had impaired my judgment, that I couldn't be trusted to make rational decisions about my own future. My thinking is perfectly clear, I said, allowing a slight edge to creep into my voice. I don't want to move into assisted living. I want to remain in the home I've shared with my husband for 30 years. That's not an irrational decision, it's a personal preference. Personal preferences are a luxury you can't afford, Vanessa snapped, and for a moment her true feelings broke through the veneer of concern she had been maintaining. Clem, you're 73 years old. You don't have experience managing finances or maintaining a house or dealing with emergencies on your own. Personal preferences have to take a back seat to practical realities. And what if the practical realities aren't what you think they are? Vanessa blinked, caught off guard by the question. What do you mean? I mean, what if your assumptions about my capabilities and resources are incorrect? What if I'm more prepared to live independently than you've given me credit for? Clem, I know you want to believe that, but wanting something doesn't make it true. The numbers don't lie. Social Security survivor benefits plus whatever small savings Robert left behind simply aren't enough to maintain this lifestyle. We've done the math. Have you? Of course we have. Marcus and I aren't trying to hurt you or control you. We're trying to help you face reality before you get in over your head financially. I studied Vanessa's face, noting the combination of condescension and impatience that she was no longer bothering to hide. This was the real Vanessa, the one who saw me as an obstacle to be managed rather than a person to be respected. The concerned daughter-in-law routine had been just that. A routine performed for the benefit of maintaining family harmony while she and Marcus worked to reorganize my life according to their preferences. What if I told you that Robert left me more than you realize? I asked quietly. Vanessa's expression sharpened with interest. What kind of more? Enough to take care of myself without depending on Marcus or anyone else. Clem, if there was some kind of significant inheritance, don't you think Robert would have mentioned it? Don't you think it would have been part of the estate planning process? Maybe it was part of the estate planning process, just not in the way you expected. Vanessa moved closer, her eyes bright with curiosity and calculation. Are you saying Robert had assets that we don't know about? Hidden accounts or investments or something like that? I could see the wheels turning in her mind, the rapid recalculation of possibilities that my hints had triggered. If I had more money than they had assumed, it changed everything about their plans for me. It also opened up new opportunities for them to benefit from their relationship with me. I'm saying that your assumptions about my financial situation may be incorrect, I said carefully. How incorrect? Incorrect enough that I don't need to depend on Marcus's charity or accept his plans for my future. Vanessa was quiet for a long moment, processing this information and its implications. When she spoke again, her voice had taken on a different quality, warmer and more deferential than it had been just minutes earlier. Clem, if that's true, then of course that changes things. But don't you think it would be wise to have Marcus help you manage whatever assets Robert left behind? Financial planning can be very complicated, especially for someone who hasn't had much experience with investments and tax strategies. And there it was, the pivot from trying to warehouse me in assisted living to trying to control whatever resources I might have. Vanessa had instantly recognized that if I had significant money, the smart strategy wasn't to get rid of me, but to position herself and Marcus as indispensable advisors who could help me manage my newfound wealth. I think I can handle my own financial affairs, I said, but why would you want to handle them yourself when you could have help from people who care about you? Marcus has an MBA, and he's been very successful in his career. He could help you make sure your money is properly invested and protected. Marcus could help me make sure my money was properly invested and protected, meaning that Marcus could help himself to decision-making authority over assets that belong to me. It was a smooth transition from trying to control my living situation to trying to control my financial situation, all wrapped in the same rhetoric of concern and family obligation. That's very generous of him, I said neutrally. It's not generous, it's family, Vanessa said, her voice now warm with the kind of artificial intimacy she had been withholding just minutes earlier. Clem, if you really do have more resources than we realized, then maybe we need to completely rethink our approach here. Maybe instead of looking at assisted living, we should be talking about home modifications and support services that would let you stay here safely. Home modifications and support services that would be carefully managed by Marcus and Vanessa, of course. Services that they would research and hire and oversee, ensuring that they maintain control over my living situation even if I remained in my own house. What kind of home modifications? I asked, curious to see how quickly she could generate a new plan now that the old one was no longer viable. Well, there are all kinds of possibilities. We could install a security system with medical alert capabilities. We could hire a cleaning service and a yard service to handle the maintenance you can't manage yourself. We could arrange for meal delivery and transportation services. We could even look into hiring a companion aide to help with daily activities and provide some social interaction. A companion aide. Someone to watch me and report back to Marcus and Vanessa about my activities and decisions. Someone to ensure that I didn't do anything too independent or unpredictable without their knowledge and approval. That sounds very expensive, I said. Well, if you have the resources to afford it, then money shouldn't be the deciding factor. The important thing is making sure you're safe and well cared for. Safe and well cared for, meaning supervised and controlled. Vanessa was describing a different version of the same loss of autonomy she had been advocating for with assisted living, just repackaged for a woman who apparently had more money than they had originally thought. I'll certainly consider all of those options, I said. Good. And Clem, I hope you know that Marcus and I are here to help with whatever you decide. We don't want you to feel like you have to figure all of this out on your own. I appreciate that. Vanessa gathered up her purse and moved toward the door, her entire demeanor transformed by the possibility that I might be worth more than she had previously calculated. I should probably call and cancel those appointments for today, since you're not ready to look at assisted living options. But maybe we could schedule some time this week to sit down and talk about your actual financial situation. It would help us know how to best support you going forward. I'll let you know, I said, opening the front door for her. After Vanessa left, I stood at the window and watched her car disappear down the street. The transformation in her behavior had been remarkable and revealing. The moment she suspected I might have more money than she had assumed, her entire approach had shifted from trying to get rid of me to trying to control me. Either way, the underlying assumption was the same. I was incapable of managing my own life and needed their guidance and oversight. But I had learned something valuable from our conversation. Vanessa and Marcus's plans for me were entirely contingent on their assumptions about my financial dependence. If those assumptions were wrong, they would need to develop new strategies for maintaining influence over my decisions. And those new strategies would likely be just as self-serving as the old ones, just packaged differently. The phone rang as I was making dinner, and this time I recognized Marcus's number on the caller ID. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of me. Hi, Marcus. Mom, Vanessa told me you canceled your appointments this afternoon. She said you might have some assets that we weren't aware of. Did she? She said you hinted that Dad might have left you more than we realized. Is that true? I could hear the carefully controlled excitement in his voice, the same tone Vanessa had used when she thought she was on the verge of discovering hidden wealth. Neither of them was concerned about whether I was happy or comfortable or respected. They were concerned about whether there was money they hadn't accounted for and how they could position themselves to benefit from it. Your father was a careful man, I said carefully. He made sure I would be taken care of. Mom, that's wonderful news. But managing a large inheritance can be really complicated. There are tax implications and investment decisions and all kinds of legal issues that can be overwhelming if you don't have experience with them. I'm sure there are. The thing is, I'd be happy to help you navigate all of that. I could take a look at whatever Dad left behind and help you understand your options. We could even meet with a financial advisor together to make sure everything is properly organized. Meaning that Marcus would insert himself into my financial decision-making process and gradually assume control over assets that belong to me. It was the same strategy Vanessa had suggested, just presented by a different family member. That's very thoughtful of you, I said. It's not thoughtful, it's practical. Mom, if you really do have significant assets, then you need professional help managing them. And you need family members who can help you avoid getting taken advantage of by unscrupulous advisors or investment scams. Family members who could help me avoid getting taken advantage of by unscrupulous advisors while simultaneously taking advantage of me themselves. The irony was almost overwhelming. I'll keep that in mind, I said. Look, why don't Vanessa and I come over this weekend and we can sit down and go through everything together? We can look at Dad's papers and figure out exactly what the financial picture looks like. And then, we can make a plan for moving forward. Not I can make a plan, but we can make a plan. As if my financial affairs were naturally a family project rather than my personal responsibility. I'm not ready for that conversation yet, I said. Mom, I understand that this is all overwhelming, but you can't just ignore it. If Dad left you a substantial inheritance, there are probably deadlines and requirements that need to be handled promptly. You could lose money or get in trouble with the IRS if things aren't managed properly. Unless you let Marcus take over and handle everything for you. It was fear-based manipulation wrapped in family concern, designed to make me feel incompetent and dependent on his expertise. I'm not ignoring anything, I said firmly. I'm handling my affairs in my own time and in my own way. There was a pause, and when Marcus spoke again, his voice had an edge to it that reminded me uncomfortably of his father in a bad mood. Mom, you're being unrealistic. You don't have experience with complex financial matters. You've never had to deal with investment accounts, or tax planning, or estate management. This isn't the time to be stubborn about accepting help. I'm not being stubborn, I'm being cautious. Cautious about what? We're your family. We're trying to help you. Are you? Of course we are. What kind of question is that? It's the kind of question that someone asks when they're not sure that the help being offered is actually in their best interests. Another pause, longer this time. Mom, what exactly are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just observing that your concern about my welfare seems to increase proportionally with your assumptions about my financial worth. That's not fair. Isn't it? Yesterday, you and Vanessa were convinced that I needed to be moved into assisted living because I was too poor and incompetent to manage my own household. Today, when I suggested that I might have more resources than you realized, suddenly you're interested in helping me manage those resources rather than getting rid of me. We were never trying to get rid of you. No? Then what would you call researching assisted living facilities without consulting me and making appointments for tours that I never agreed to attend? Marcus was quiet for several seconds, and I could hear him breathing carefully on the other end of the line. When he spoke again, his voice was more controlled, as if he was working hard to contain his frustration. Mom, I think you're misinterpreting our motivations. Vanessa and I love you, and we want what's best for you. If we got ahead of ourselves with the assisted living research, it's because we were worried about your safety and well-being, not because we were trying to control you. And now? Now what? Now that you think I might have money, what do you want? We want the same thing we've always wanted, for you to be safe and happy and well cared for. If you have resources that make it possible for you to stay in your own home, then that's wonderful. But that doesn't change the fact that you're going to need help managing those resources responsibly. Help managing those resources responsibly, meaning supervision and control over my financial decisions. The goal hadn't changed, just the tactics for achieving it. What if I don't want help? I asked. Mom, that's not realistic. You've never managed significant assets before. You don't know about investment strategies or tax optimization or risk management. You need professional guidance, and you need family members who can help you make sure you're getting good advice. Family members who could help me make sure I was getting good advice, while positioning themselves to influence or override that advice when it didn't serve their purposes. I'll make my own decisions about what kind of guidance I need, I said. Mom, please don't be stubborn about this. If Dad really did leave you substantial assets, then you have responsibilities now that you've never had before. You can't just wing it and hope for the best. I'm not winging anything. I'm being methodical and careful about understanding my situation before I make any decisions. Then let us help you understand your situation. We can all work together to figure out what Dad left behind and what your options are. All work together, meaning that Marcus and Vanessa would involve themselves in every aspect of my financial planning and decision-making, gradually assuming control over choices that should be mine alone to make. I don't need that kind of help, I said. You think you don't need it, but you don't know what you don't know. Mom, financial planning isn't something you can learn overnight. It takes years of experience to understand the complexities involved. Years of experience like Marcus had, conveniently enough. Years of experience that made him indispensable to my future well-being, assuming I was smart enough to recognize my own limitations and accept his guidance. I'll figure it out, I said. Mom, you're not listening to me. This isn't about pride or independence. This is about protecting yourself and your assets from costly mistakes. If you make the wrong decisions, you could lose everything Dad worked to build. You could lose everything Dad worked to build, unless you let Marcus take over and make sure that didn't happen. It was the same fear-based manipulation he had used earlier, just applied to a different scenario. I appreciate your concern, I said, but I'm going to handle this in my own way. What way is that? My way. Marcus let out a frustrated sigh. Mom, I don't understand why you're being so secretive and defensive about this. We're your family. We should be working together. We should be working together on what? On managing your inheritance and planning your future. My inheritance and my future, I repeated. Those sound like things that belong to me, not to us. Of course they belong to you. But that doesn't mean you have to handle everything by yourself. That's what family is for, to help each other through difficult transitions. To help each other through difficult transitions by assuming control over decisions and resources that belong to other family members. It was a fascinating definition of help, one that seemed to benefit the helpers more than the person being helped. I'll keep that in mind, I said. Mom, can we please just have one honest conversation about this? Can you tell me what Dad actually left behind so we can make rational plans for moving forward? I'm not ready to have that conversation yet. When will you be ready? I don't know. Mom, this is ridiculous. You can't just keep everything secret indefinitely. If there are assets that need to be managed or legal issues that need to be resolved, delaying action could cause serious problems. Serious problems that could be avoided if I would just tell Marcus everything and let him take charge of the situation. It was remarkable how quickly his concern for my well-being translated into demands for information and control. I'm not keeping anything secret, I said. I'm just not ready to discuss my personal financial affairs with anyone else yet. Anyone else? I'm not anyone else, I'm your son. You're my son, not my financial advisor or my legal guardian. Mom, what has gotten into you? You're acting like I'm some kind of stranger trying to take advantage of you instead of your own child who's worried about your welfare. Are you worried about my welfare, Marcus? Or are you worried about your own interests? That's insulting. Is it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like your level of concern about my welfare correlates pretty directly with your assumptions about how much money I might have. Mom, that's not true, and you know it. Do I? Yesterday, you were ready to move me into assisted living because you were convinced I was too poor to maintain my own household. Today, you want to manage my investments because you think I might be too rich to handle them myself. Either way, the conclusion is the same. I'm incompetent, and you need to take control. I never said you were incompetent. You didn't have to say it. It's been the underlying assumption in every conversation we've had since your father died. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and I could hear the sound of him trying to control his breathing. When he spoke again, his voice was tight with barely contained anger. Mom, I don't know what's gotten into you, but this conversation isn't productive. When you're ready to have a rational discussion about your situation, call me. Until then, I hope you know what you're doing. He hung up without saying goodbye, leaving me sitting in my kitchen with the phone in my hand and the distinct feeling that I had just crossed some kind of line in my relationship with my son. But it wasn't a line I had drawn. It was a line that had always been there, invisible but real, separating the person I was supposed to be from the person I actually was. The person I was supposed to be was grateful for their concern, deferential to their expertise, and compliant with their plans for my future. The person I actually was had nearly $2 million, a sharp mind, and no intention of letting anyone else control my life. For the first time since Robert's death, I felt genuinely powerful. Not because of the money, although that certainly didn't hurt, but because I was finally seeing my family relationships clearly and responding to them honestly. I wasn't the helpless widow they thought I was, and I wasn't going to pretend to be one just to make them more comfortable. The next morning, I called James Morrison and scheduled an emergency meeting for that afternoon. Then I called a lawyer whose name I had found in Robert's address book, a woman named Catherine Walsh who specialized in estate planning and elder law. I made an appointment for the end of the week and told her secretary that I needed to discuss protecting my assets from family members who might try to manipulate or control me. Then I sat down at Robert's desk and started making a list of everything I needed to do to protect myself and my independence. Install a home security system, research housekeeping and maintenance services, update my will to reflect my current priorities and relationships, consider moving some of my assets into accounts that Marcus and Vanessa couldn't access or monitor. Most importantly, I needed to decide how much of the truth to reveal to them and when. Robert's letter had suggested that I should observe their behavior before making that decision, and I had seen enough over the past few days to understand exactly what kind of people I was dealing with. They weren't evil people, they weren't intentionally cruel or malicious, but they were selfish people who saw me as an extension of themselves, rather than as an independent person with my own rights and preferences. They genuinely believed that their plans for my future were in my best interests, partly because those plans also happened to serve their own interests very well. The question was whether revealing the full extent of my financial resources would change their behavior for the better, or simply give them new opportunities to manipulate and control me. Based on what I had observed so far, I suspected it would be the latter. But there was another possibility that I was beginning to consider. What if I didn't tell them anything at all? What if I simply continued living my life on my own terms, making my own decisions, and letting them draw their own conclusions about my capabilities and resources? It would be a risk. They might escalate their efforts to control me, especially if they continued to believe I was financially vulnerable. But it would also be a test of whether they could learn to respect my autonomy without being forced to do so by the knowledge that I had the resources to resist them. I was still thinking about these possibilities when the doorbell rang. I looked out the window and saw a delivery truck in my driveway, with a young man in a brown uniform standing on my front porch holding a large envelope. I signed for the delivery and waited until the truck was gone before opening the envelope. Inside was a thick packet of legal documents from a law firm I didn't recognize, along with a cover letter that made my blood run cold. The letter was from an attorney representing Marcus and Vanessa, and it informed me that they were filing a petition with the county court to have me declared mentally incompetent due to my advanced age and recent bereavement. They were requesting that Marcus be appointed as my legal guardian, with full authority to make decisions about my medical care, living arrangements, and financial affairs. According to the letter, they had evidence that I was suffering from grief-induced cognitive impairment that was preventing me from making rational decisions about my own welfare. They cited my refusal to consider assisted living options and my secretive behavior regarding my financial affairs as proof that I was no longer capable of caring for myself. The petition would be heard in court in 10 days. I had 1 week to respond with my own attorney and evidence of my competency, or the court would likely grant their request by default. I sat down heavily in Robert's chair, the legal documents scattered across the desk in front of me. Marcus and Vanessa hadn't been content to wait for me to voluntarily accept their plans for my future. They had decided to use the legal system to force me to comply. But they had made one crucial mistake. They still didn't know about the money or the will or the fact that I had been consulting with financial advisors and attorneys. They thought they were dealing with a confused, grief-stricken widow who would be overwhelmed by legal proceedings and grateful to have her competent son take charge of the situation. They were about to discover just how wrong they were about me. And this time, I wasn't going to hold back. The morning of the competency hearing arrived with crystalline clarity. The kind of November day when every detail stood out in sharp relief against the pale winter sky. I had been awake since 4 o'clock, not from anxiety, but from anticipation. After 10 days of preparation, I was ready to show Marcus and Vanessa exactly what kind of woman they had been trying to manipulate and control. Catherine Walsh arrived at my house at 7:30, carrying a leather briefcase that contained enough documentation to bury Marcus and Vanessa's petition under an avalanche of evidence. Catherine was in her 50s, with silver hair and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She had spent the past week assembling a case that would not only prove my competency, but expose the true motivations behind my son and daughter-in-law's legal maneuvering. "How are you feeling this morning, Clementine?" she asked as we sat at my kitchen table reviewing our strategy one final time. "Powerful," I said, and I meant it. For the first time in years, maybe decades, I feel like I know exactly who I am and what I'm capable of. Catherine smiled. "Good, because by the time we walk out of that courtroom today, Marcus and Vanessa are going to understand that they made a catastrophic error in judgment. Are you prepared for the possibility that this could permanently damage your relationship with them?" I had been thinking about that question for days. The old Clementine, the one who had spent 47 years prioritizing other people's comfort over her own dignity, would have been devastated by the prospect of family conflict. But the new Clementine, the one who had discovered her own strength and resources, had a different perspective. They damaged our relationship when they decided to have me declared mentally incompetent rather than respect my autonomy, I said. "I'm just responding to their choices." Catherine nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the right attitude. Remember, we're not just defending against their petition today. We're going on the offensive. By the time we're finished, they'll be the ones who need to explain their behavior." We arrived at the courthouse 45 minutes before the hearing was scheduled to begin. I had dressed carefully in a navy suit with pearl accessories, aiming for an appearance that conveyed competence and dignity rather than wealth. Catherine had advised me to let my composure and intelligence speak for themselves rather than trying to make any kind of dramatic statement through my appearance. Marcus and Vanessa were already in the hallway outside the courtroom, huddled in conversation with their attorney, a thin man in an expensive suit who looked like he specialized in the kind of legal maneuvering that wealthy families used to get their way. They looked up when Catherine and I approached, and I could see surprise and concern flash across their faces when they realized I had retained professional legal representation. "Mom," Marcus said, standing up and taking a step toward me. "I'm glad you decided to take this seriously enough to hire a lawyer. Maybe now we can have a rational conversation about what's best for everyone." "I've been taking this very seriously from the moment I received your petition," I replied evenly, "though I have to say I was surprised by your approach. In most families, when someone has concerns about a relative's well-being, they start with a conversation rather than a legal proceeding." Vanessa stepped forward, her expression carefully arranged to convey loving concern. "Clem, we tried to have conversations with you, but you weren't willing to be open about your situation or accept our help. We were worried that you might make decisions that you would regret later, especially regarding your financial affairs." "My financial affairs," I repeated. "Yes, I imagine those are very concerning to you." Their attorney cleared his throat and introduced himself as David Brennan. He shook hands with Catherine and attempted to project confidence, but I could see him reassessing the situation now that he realized I wasn't representing myself. "Mrs. Davis," he said in a tone that managed to be both patronizing and sympathetic, "I want you to know that this proceeding isn't intended to be adversarial. Your family is simply concerned about your welfare and wants to make sure you have the support you need during this difficult transition. How thoughtful of them, I said dryly. When we entered the courtroom, I was struck by how formal and intimidating the environment was clearly meant to be. The judge's bench loomed over everything else, flanked by flags and legal seals that spoke to the gravity of the decisions made in this space. It was exactly the kind of setting that might overwhelm someone who was actually suffering from cognitive impairment or emotional instability. But I wasn't suffering from either of those conditions. I was a 73-year-old woman with nearly $2 million and a clear understanding of exactly what was happening here. And I was about to prove it in a way that Marcus and Vanessa would never forget. Judge Patricia Hernandez was a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that suggested she had limited patience for frivolous legal proceedings. She reviewed the petition briefly, then looked up at the assembled parties. This is a hearing to determine whether Clementine Davis should be declared mentally incompetent and placed under the guardianship of her son, Marcus Davis, she said. Mr. Brennan, you may present your case. Brennan stood and launched into what was clearly a well-rehearsed presentation about the challenges facing elderly widows who had been financially dependent on their deceased spouses. He painted a picture of me as a confused, isolated woman who was making irrational decisions due to grief and inexperience with the practical realities of independent living. Your Honor, he said, Mrs. Davis has refused to consider reasonable alternatives to living alone in a house that is far too large and expensive for her to maintain. She has been secretive about her financial affairs and resistant to accepting help from family members who are genuinely concerned about her welfare. These behaviors suggest cognitive impairment that could lead to serious consequences if left unchecked. He called Marcus as his first witness, and my son took the stand with the same earnest expression he had worn throughout this entire ordeal. Under Brennan's questioning, Marcus testified about my supposed inability to handle modern banking and technology, my refusal to discuss my financial situation openly, and my irrational attachment to remaining in the family home, despite the obvious practical challenges. Your Honor, Marcus said, his voice heavy with what sounded like genuine emotion. I love my mother deeply, and I'm terrified that she's going to hurt herself by making decisions she's not equipped to make. She's never had to manage finances or household maintenance on her own, and I'm afraid she doesn't understand how vulnerable she is. It was a masterful performance, and I could see that Judge Hernandez was listening carefully to his testimony. If I hadn't known better, I might have been moved by his apparent concern for my well-being. Brennan then called Vanessa, who testified about her attempts to help me explore assisted living options and my unreasonable resistance to considering what she characterized as obviously superior alternatives to living alone. Your Honor, Vanessa said, tears actually forming in her eyes, Clementine has always been such a strong, independent woman, and I think she's struggling to accept that her circumstances have changed. We're not trying to control her or take away her independence. We just want to make sure she's safe and cared for during this difficult time. Again, it was a compelling performance, delivered with apparent sincerity and obvious affection. If the judge hadn't seen the evidence that Catherine was prepared to present, she might have been convinced that Marcus and Vanessa were loving family members facing a difficult situation with an unreasonable relative. When Brennan finished presenting his case, Judge Hernandez turned to Catherine. Ms. Walsh, you may present your defense. Catherine stood with the kind of quiet confidence that comes from knowing you hold all the winning cards. Thank you, Your Honor. I'd like to begin by calling Mrs. Davis to testify on her own behalf. I walked to the witness stand with steady steps, placed my hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. As I settled into the chair and looked out at the courtroom, I could see Marcus and Vanessa watching me with expressions of concern that I now recognized as carefully calculated performances. Catherine began with basic questions designed to establish my mental competency. She asked me to state my full name, age, and address. She asked me to describe my educational background and work history. She asked me to explain my understanding of why we were in court that day. I answered each question clearly and thoroughly, speaking directly to Judge Hernandez rather than to the attorneys. I could see the judge's expression shift slightly as she realized that I was neither confused nor intimidated by the legal proceedings. Mrs. Davis, Catherine said, your son has testified that you've been secretive about your financial affairs and resistant to accepting help with managing your assets. Can you explain your perspective on these issues? Certainly, I said. I haven't been secretive about my financial affairs. I simply haven't chosen to discuss them with Marcus and Vanessa because I don't believe they're entitled to that information. As for accepting help with managing my assets, I have been working with professional advisors to ensure that my financial affairs are properly handled. Can you tell the court about those professional advisors? I've been working with James Morrison, a certified financial planner who managed my late husband's investments for 15 years. I've also retained your services as my attorney to ensure that my legal affairs are properly organized. Both Mr. Morrison and you have assessed my mental competency as part of your professional responsibilities, and both have concluded that I am fully capable of making my own decisions. Catherine nodded and moved to her table, where she picked up a thick folder. Your Honor, I'd like to submit Mr. Morrison's written assessment of Mrs. Davis's mental competency, as well as my own professional evaluation. Both documents conclude that Mrs. Davis shows no signs of cognitive impairment or decision-making deficits. Judge Hernandez accepted the documents and began reviewing them, while Catherine continued her questioning. Mrs. Davis, your son has suggested that you're not equipped to manage your financial affairs independently. Can you tell the court about your current financial situation? This was the moment I had been preparing for. The moment when I would reveal the truth that Marcus and Vanessa had been so eager to discover. I looked directly at them as I answered. Your Honor, my late husband left me an investment portfolio currently valued at approximately $1.9 million. The portfolio generates annual income of approximately $120,000 after taxes and fees. I also own my home outright, with no mortgage or other debts. I am financially independent and have no need for assistance from family members or government programs. The silence in the courtroom was complete. Marcus's face had gone white, and Vanessa was staring at me with an expression of shock that would have been comical under different circumstances. Even their attorney looked stunned by the revelation. Catherine continued smoothly. Mrs. Davis, given your substantial financial resources, do you believe you need a guardian to help you manage your affairs? Absolutely not, I said firmly. I have professional advisors to help me with complex financial decisions, and I have the resources to hire whatever additional help I need for household maintenance or personal care. I am fully capable of making my own decisions about where to live, how to spend my money, and how to organize my daily life. Your Honor, Catherine said, turning to address the judge directly. Mrs. Davis is clearly not the confused, dependent widow that the petitioners have described. She is a financially sophisticated woman who has been working with professional advisors to manage substantial assets. The fact that she chose not to share this information with family members who were pressuring her to give up her independence shows wisdom, not incompetence. Judge Hernandez looked up from the documents she had been reviewing. Mr. Brennan, do you have any questions for Mrs. Davis? Brennan stood uncertainly, clearly thrown by the revelation of my financial situation. Mrs. Davis, if you have substantial financial resources, why didn't you share that information with your family when they expressed concern about your ability to support yourself? Because their concern wasn't really about my ability to support myself, I replied. Their concern was about having to support me themselves. When they believed I was financially dependent, they wanted to move me into assisted living to minimize their own responsibilities. When they suspected I might have money, they immediately began trying to position themselves as advisors who could help me manage it. Either way, the goal was to control my decisions rather than respect my autonomy. That's not true, Marcus said from his seat, but Judge Hernandez silenced him with a sharp look. Catherine retrieved another document from her folder. Your Honor, I'd like to submit evidence that supports Mrs. Davis's characterization of her family's motivations. She handed a transcript to the judge and copies to Brennan. This is a recording of a conversation between Mrs. Davis and her daughter-in-law, recorded without Mrs. Davis's knowledge. I believe it will provide insight into the true nature of the petitioner's concerns. Judge Hernandez reviewed the transcript while Catherine explained its contents. Your Honor, in this conversation, Mrs. Davis's daughter-in-law explicitly states that Mrs. Davis has become, quote, dead weight, and that the family needs to make practical decisions about her future. She also discusses the financial burden that caring for Mrs. Davis would place on their family and suggests that moving her into assisted living would be more convenient for them. I watched Marcus and Vanessa as the judge read through Vanessa's recorded words. Marcus looked sick, while Vanessa had gone pale and was staring at her hands. They had assumed that their private conversations would remain private, that no one would ever hear the casual cruelty with which they had discussed my future. "Mrs. Davis," Judge Hernandez said, looking up from the transcript, "did you make this recording?" "No, Your Honor. My daughter-in-law made that recording using her phone, apparently intending to gather evidence that could be used against me in some way. She was unaware that I had discovered the recording function was activated during our conversation. It wasn't entirely true. I had actually found the recording on Vanessa's phone when she had left it unattended during one of her visits. But it was close enough to the truth for legal purposes, and it established that Vanessa had been the one engaging in deceptive behavior." Catherine moved to her final line of questioning. "Mrs. Davis, if this petition is denied, what are your plans for the future?" I straightened in my chair and looked directly at Marcus and Vanessa as I answered. "I plan to continue living in my own home, managing my own affairs, and making my own decisions about my future. I plan to maintain my independence and dignity without interference from family members who apparently believe they know better than I do what's best for my life. Do you have any concerns about your son and daughter-in-law's motivations in filing this petition?" "Yes, I do. I believe they filed this petition not out of genuine concern for my welfare, but out of frustration that I wouldn't comply with their plans for my future. When they couldn't convince me to voluntarily give up my independence, they decided to use the legal system to force me to do so. That's not love, Your Honor. That's control." Catherine returned to her table. "Your Honor, the evidence clearly shows that Mrs. Davis is a competent, financially sophisticated woman who is fully capable of managing her own affairs. The petitioner's characterization of her as a confused, dependent widow appears to have been based on incomplete information and their own desire to control her living situation. I respectfully request that the petition be denied." Judge Hernandez called a brief recess to review the evidence, and I returned to my seat next to Catherine. Across the aisle, Marcus and Vanessa were engaged in what appeared to be an intense whispered argument with their attorney. When court resumed, Judge Hernandez delivered her ruling with the kind of clarity that left no room for misinterpretation. "After reviewing all the evidence presented today, I find no basis for the claim that Mrs. Davis is mentally incompetent or in need of a guardian. The evidence shows that she is managing substantial financial assets with appropriate professional guidance, that she is making rational decisions about her living situation based on her preferences and resources, and that she has been unfairly characterized by the petitioners as incompetent simply because she refused to comply with their plans for her future." She paused and looked directly at Marcus and Vanessa. "I am particularly troubled by the evidence suggesting that this petition was filed not out of genuine concern for Mrs. Davis's welfare, but out of frustration with her refusal to accept the petitioner's advice about her living arrangements. Using the legal system to coerce family members into compliance with your preferences is not only inappropriate, it's potentially abusive." Marcus started to stand, but his attorney pulled him back into his seat. Judge Hernandez continued. "The petition is denied. Mrs. Davis will retain full control over her personal, medical, and financial affairs. Furthermore, I am ordering that the petitioners pay Mrs. Davis's legal fees in this matter, as this appears to have been a frivolous proceeding based on incomplete information and questionable motivations." The gavel came down with a sharp crack that seemed to echo through the suddenly silent courtroom. It was over. I had won completely and decisively, in a way that left no doubt about my competency or my right to make my own decisions about my life. As we gathered our papers and prepared to leave, Marcus approached me with an expression that mixed shame, anger, and something that might have been respect. "Mom," he said quietly, "I think we need to talk." "I think we do," I agreed. "But it's going to be a very different conversation than the ones we've been having." Outside the courthouse, Catherine shook my hand with obvious satisfaction. "Clementine, that was one of the most satisfying hearings I've ever participated in. You should be proud of how you handled yourself in there." "I am proud," I said, and realized it was true. For the first time in years, I'm genuinely proud of who I am and how I've conducted myself. Marcus and Vanessa lingered on the courthouse steps, clearly uncertain about how to proceed. Finally, Marcus walked over to where Catherine and I were standing. "Mom, I owe you an apology," he said, and for the first time in weeks, his voice sounded genuine rather than calculated. "We handled this badly. All of it. Yes, you did, I said calmly. The question is whether you understand why you handled it badly and whether you're prepared to change your behavior going forward. Vanessa joined us, her face red with embarrassment and anger. Clem, I can't believe you recorded our private conversation and used it against us in court. That's a violation of trust that I don't think I can forgive. I looked at her steadily. Vanessa, you're the one who activated the recording function on your phone during our conversation. I simply made sure that your own words were available to demonstrate your true feelings about me. If you're embarrassed by what you said, perhaps you should consider why you said it in the first place. I was trying to help you, she said, but the words sounded hollow even to her. No, you were trying to control me. There's a difference, and it's a difference you need to understand if we're going to have any kind of relationship going forward. Marcus stepped between us. Mom, what do you want from us? How do we fix this? It was a good question, and one I had been thinking about throughout the legal proceedings. What did I want from them? What kind of relationship was possible now that the truth had been revealed? I want you to treat me like a competent adult who is capable of making her own decisions, I said. I want you to ask me what I want instead of telling me what you think I need. I want you to respect my choices even when they don't align with your preferences. And I want you to understand that having money doesn't make me a resource for you to manage, just like not having money wouldn't make me a burden for you to dispose of. Marcus nodded slowly. I think I can do that. But Mom, it's hard for me to see you as anything other than my mother who needs to be protected and cared for. That's how I was raised to think about family relationships. Then maybe it's time to learn a different way of thinking about family relationships, I said. Maybe it's time to recognize that caring for someone doesn't always mean controlling them. Vanessa remained silent, her face a mask of barely controlled anger and humiliation. I suspected that our relationship would never recover from what had happened, and I found myself surprisingly comfortable with that possibility. Some relationships couldn't survive the revelation of their true nature, and perhaps that was for the best. Can we start over? Marcus asked. Can we try to build a different kind of relationship based on what we know now? I considered his question carefully. The old Clementine would have immediately said yes, would have prioritized family harmony over her own dignity and autonomy. But the new Clementine had different priorities. We can try, I said finally, but it's going to require real changes in how you think about me and treat me. It's not enough to just apologize and expect everything to go back to the way it was. The way it was is what got us here in the first place. Marcus nodded again. I understand. And Mom? I'm sorry about Dad's money. I had no idea he had left you so well provided for. If you had known, you would have treated me differently, I finished. But the point is that you should have treated me with respect, regardless of my financial situation. My worth as a person isn't determined by my bank account balance. You're right, he said quietly. I see that now. As we walked to our separate cars, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness because the illusions I had maintained about my family relationships had been permanently shattered. Relief because I no longer had to pretend that those relationships were healthier than they actually were. The drive home took me through the same familiar neighborhoods I had been navigating for 30 years, but everything looked different now. I wasn't the same woman who had left that morning. I was stronger, clearer, more certain of my own worth and capabilities. When I arrived home, I made myself a cup of tea and sat down at Robert's desk to write him a letter I would never send. Dearest Robert, I wrote, you were right about everything. You were right about Marcus and Vanessa, right about what they would try to do once you were gone, and right about my need to see them clearly before deciding how to respond. You were also right about my strength, although I think it surprised even you how much I was capable of when I finally decided to stop accommodating other people's expectations and start living according to my own values. I won today, completely and decisively, not just the legal hearing, but something more important than that. I won my independence, my dignity, and my right to make my own choices about my own life. I won the knowledge that I am not dead weight, not a burden to be managed, not a problem to be solved. I am a capable, intelligent woman with resources and options and the wisdom to use both appropriately. I don't know what my relationship with Marcus will look like going forward. He says he wants to change, and maybe he means it, but I'm not going to wait around to find out. I'm going to live my life on my own terms, with or without his approval or participation. Thank you for giving me the tools I needed to protect myself. Thank you for seeing my strength, even when I had forgotten it existed. And thank you for loving me enough to prepare me for this moment, even though it meant keeping secrets that must have been difficult to carry alone. I miss you every day, but I'm not the helpless widow everyone expected me to become. I'm the woman you always knew I was, finally ready to prove it to the world. All my love, Clem. I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer with Robert's other papers. Then I picked up the phone and called James Morrison to schedule a meeting about some investment ideas I had been considering. I had money to manage, a life to live, and plans to make. For the first time since Robert's death, I felt genuinely excited about the future. Not because it would be easy or comfortable, but because it would be mine. The next few months brought changes that would have seemed impossible just a year earlier. I hired a housekeeper and a yard service, not because I needed supervision, but because I wanted to spend my time on activities I enjoyed, rather than household maintenance. I installed a state-of-the-art security system, not because I was afraid, but because I wanted to feel completely secure in my independence. Most importantly, I began traveling. Robert and I had always talked about seeing Europe, visiting Australia, taking a cruise through the Panama Canal. We had planned to do all of those things after he retired, but retirement had lasted only 6 months before his heart attack stole our future plans along with his life. Now I had the money and the freedom to turn those dreams into reality. I booked a river cruise through Germany and Austria for the spring, reserved a cabin on a ship that would take me through the Greek islands in the summer, and started planning a fall trip to New Zealand that would include hiking and wine tasting and all the other activities I had always wanted to try. Marcus called occasionally, and our conversations were tentative but genuine. He seemed to be making an effort to treat me as an equal rather than as a dependent, though I could tell it was still difficult for him to adjust his expectations. Vanessa rarely spoke to me directly, and when she did, her words were polite but distant. I suspected she would never forgive me for the humiliation of the court hearing, and I found that I didn't particularly care. The most surprising development was my relationship with my granddaughter Emma, Marcus, and Vanessa's 10-year-old daughter. Once Emma learned that I had money and independence, she became fascinated by what she called my adventure stories. She wanted to hear about my travels, my investments, my decision to stand up to her parents in court. "Grandma Clem," she said during one of our phone conversations, "when I grow up, I want to be like you. I want to have my own money and make my own decisions and not let anybody tell me what to do." "That's a wonderful goal, Emma," I told her. "But remember, independence isn't just about having money. It's about being strong enough to know what you want and brave enough to pursue it, even when other people disagree with your choices." "Did it make you sad when Mommy and Daddy tried to make you move into that old people's place?" "It made me disappointed," I said carefully. "But it also made me determined to show them that they were wrong about what I was capable of." "And you showed them, didn't you?" "Yes, sweetheart. I showed them." 6 months after the court hearing, I received a letter from an organization that provided legal advocacy for elderly people facing guardianship proceedings. They had heard about my case and wanted to know if I would be willing to speak at a conference about protecting seniors from family members who tried to exploit or control them. I agreed immediately. Standing on that stage in front of 200 social workers, attorneys, and advocates, I told my story with pride rather than shame. I talked about the importance of recognizing that age doesn't automatically equal incompetence, that financial dependence doesn't justify loss of autonomy, and that family members don't always have their relatives' best interests at heart. The most important thing I learned, I told the audience, is that respect isn't something you can demand or deserve simply because of your relationship to someone. Respect is something you earn through your behavior, and it's something you can lose when your behavior becomes controlling or manipulative. Family relationships are not exempt from this principle. After my presentation, dozens of people approached me to share their own stories or ask for advice. Many of them were dealing with situations similar to what I had experienced: adult children or other relatives who were trying to take control of their lives under the guise of concern and protection. "What would you tell someone who is facing a guardianship petition right now?" asked a woman whose daughter was trying to have her declared incompetent so she could gain control of her mother's modest savings account. "I would tell them to get a good lawyer, document everything, And remember that they have rights that don't disappear just because they're elderly or grieving or dealing with family pressure, I said. I would tell them that they're stronger than anyone gives them credit for, including themselves. Driving home from the conference, I thought about how much my life had changed since that day at Robert's memorial service when Vanessa had called me dead weight. I had discovered financial resources I never knew existed, legal rights I had never thought to exercise, and personal strength I had forgotten I possessed. But more than any of that, I had discovered something that no amount of money could buy, and no legal proceeding could guarantee: the knowledge that I was worthy of respect, capable of independence, and deserving of the right to make my own choices about my own life. Robert had been right when he wrote that I was stronger than anyone gave me credit for, but I think even he would have been surprised by just how strong I turned out to be when I finally decided to stop hiding that strength from the world. I was 74 years old, financially independent, legally protected, and finally completely free to live my life on my own terms. And for a woman who had once been dismissed as dead weight, that felt like the greatest victory of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.